There are moments in life when everything we know, everything we built, everything we call home, must be left behind for something we cannot yet see. This is not the story of a perfect man. This is the story of a man who heard a voice in the wilderness and chose to believe it, even when belief made no sense at all. His name was Abram, and in the ancient city of Ur, surrounded by ziggurats that pierced the Mesopotamian sky, he lived among people who worshiped gods of stone and fire. The air was thick with incense. The streets echoed with the chants of priests. But in the quietness of his own heart, Abram heard something different. A voice, clear, unmistakable, personal. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. Imagine the weight of those words. Not a destination, not a map, not even a promise of safety. Just a command to go, to leave everything familiar, to step into the unknown with nothing but a voice to guide him. And Abram, at 75 years old, chose to obey. This was not youthful impulsiveness. This was not the recklessness of someone with nothing to lose. Abram had wealth. He had security. He had roots that ran deep into the soil of his homeland. And yet, he gathered his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all their possessions, and he walked away from everything he had ever known. The journey was long. The desert was unforgiving. And with every step, Abram moved further from certainty and deeper into faith. He did not know where he was going. He only knew who had called him. And somehow, that was enough. When Abram reached the land of Canaan, he built an altar, not a house, not a fortress, an altar, because before he claimed the land, he acknowledged the one who had brought him there. And God appeared to him and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." But there was a problem, a profound, painful problem. Abram had no offspring. His wife Sarai was barren, and as the years passed, that promise seemed more and more impossible. How could he be the father of nations when he was not even the father of one? Doubt is a quiet thing. It does not always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it whispers in the night, when the stars are distant and the promises feel hollow. And Abram wrestled with that whisper. He wondered if perhaps God meant something else. Perhaps the heir would be his servant, Eliezer. Perhaps the promise was symbolic, not literal. But God led Abram outside one night under the vast canopy of the ancient sky and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be." And the scripture records something extraordinary, something that would echo through all of human history. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Not because Abram understood, not because he saw how it would happen, but because he chose to trust the character of the one who promised. That trust, that faith in the face of impossibility, was counted as righteousness. This is the foundation of faith. Not knowledge, not certainty, but trust in the goodness of God even when circumstances scream otherwise. Yet even faith is tested. Even the strongest belief must walk through fire to be refined. And Sarai, growing desperate as the years stretched on, made a decision that seemed logical, culturally acceptable, even compassionate. She offered her servant Hagar to Abram, so that perhaps through her, the promise could be fulfilled. Abram agreed, and Hagar conceived. But what followed was not blessing. It was bitterness, jealousy, division. The household that had journeyed together in faith now fractured under the weight of human intervention in divine timing. Hagar fled into the wilderness, carrying a child who was not the child of promise, though Abram loved him deeply. 13 years passed. 13 years of silence from heaven. 13 years of living with the consequences of trying to help God keep his promise. And then, when Abram was 99 years old, God appeared to him again. "I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless." Then I will make my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers." And in that moment, God did something profound. He changed Abram's name. No longer would he be Abram, exalted father. Now he would be Abraham, father of many nations. And Sarai became Sarah, princess, mother of nations. The promise was not just renewed. It was sealed with new identities. They were no longer who they used to be. They were who God declared them to be. Even before the promise was visible, God said, "I will bless Sarah and will surely give you a son by her." And Abraham, this man of faith, this father of belief, fell face down and laughed, not in mockery, but in astonishment, because Sarah was 90 years old, because biology had spoken its final word decades ago, because even faith has moments when it must wrestle with the impossible. But God's promises are not bound by human limitations. And when 3 visitors appeared at Abraham's tent by the oaks of Mamre, the promise was given again. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son." Sarah, listening at the entrance of the tent, laughed too. A bitter laugh, a cynical laugh, the laugh of someone who has hoped too many times and been disappointed. "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure?" But the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? Is anything too hard for the Lord?" That question hangs in the air across millennia. It confronts every impossibility, every barren womb, every closed door, every shattered dream. Is anything too hard for the Lord? And then, in the fullness of time, when all human hope had been exhausted, when every natural possibility had been eliminated, Sarah conceived. She bore a son, and Abraham named him Isaac, which means laughter, because God had the last laugh, because joy came in the morning after decades of weeping, because the impossible became reality in the hands of a faithful God. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. 100 years of waiting. 25 years since the promise was first given. And now, holding this child of promise, this miracle of grace, Abraham understood something profound. Faith is not about the timing we prefer. It is about the faithfulness of the one who promises. But the testing of Abraham's faith was not over. In fact, the greatest test was yet to come. After years of cherishing Isaac, after watching him grow, after pouring into him all the love and hope that had been stored up through decades of waiting, God spoke again. "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." The words are almost unbearable to read. They were certainly unbearable to hear. This was not just any child. This was Isaac, the promised one, the miracle, the joy, the future, the fulfillment of everything God had said. And now God was asking Abraham to sacrifice him. Early the next morning, Abraham got up. He did not debate. He did not argue. He did not demand an explanation. He rose early, settled his donkey, cut wood for the burnt offering, and took Isaac with him toward the place God had indicated. For 3 days they traveled, 3 days of walking toward the unthinkable, 3 days of silence heavier than mountains, 3 days of holding command that defied everything Abraham knew about God's character and God's promises. But Abraham walked on. When they reached the place, Abraham built an altar. He arranged the wood, and Isaac, innocent and trusting, asked a question that must have shattered his father's heart. "Father, the fire and wood are here, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham, in a statement that reveals the depth of his faith, replied, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." He bound Isaac. He laid him on the altar. He reached out his hand. He took the knife. And in that moment, When obedience and agony collided, when faith stood at the edge of the abyss, the angel of the Lord called out from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. God had provided, just as Abraham had said, just as he had somehow believed even in the darkest moment of testing. And Abraham sacrificed a ram instead of his son, and he called that place "The Lord will provide." This is the faith of Abraham, not a faith that never doubts, not a faith that never struggles, not a faith that never laughs at the absurdity of divine promises, but a faith that, in the end, chooses to trust, a faith that leaves home without a map, a faith that believes in children when the womb is barren, a faith that raises the knife when God commands, believing somehow that God will remain faithful to his word. Centuries later, the Apostle Paul would write that Abraham is the father of all who believe, not because Abraham was perfect. He lied about his wife. He took matters into his own hands with Hagar. He laughed at God's promise. But because when it mattered most, Abraham chose faith over sight. He chose trust over understanding. He chose to believe that God was good even when God's commands made no sense. And God counted that faith as righteousness. Not Abraham's works, not his perfections, his faith, his choice to believe, his decision to trust. The legacy of Abraham lives on in every person who has ever heard the call of God and chosen to follow, even without knowing the destination. It lives in every barren place where hope seems dead, yet faith whispers that God can still bring life. It lives in every altar of sacrifice, where we lay down what we love most, trusting that the Lord will provide. Abraham's faith was not a single decision. It was a lifetime of small choices, day after day, to trust the voice that had called him out of you, to believe the promise when his body said it was impossible, to obey the command even when it contradicted everything he understood about God's character. And because Abraham believed, he became the father of many nations, not just physically, but spiritually. Every person who has ever chosen faith over fear, trust over doubt, obedience over understanding, walks in the footsteps of Abraham. The stars Abraham counted that night in Canaan still shine in the heavens, and his descendants, as numerous as those stars, are not just those who share his bloodline, but all who share his faith, all who hear the call to leave what is familiar and step into the unknown, all who believe God's promises even when circumstances mock them, all who raise the knife in obedience, trusting that somehow, in ways beyond comprehension, the Lord will provide. This is the faith that pleases God. Not perfection, but trust. Not understanding, but obedience. Not certainty, but hope in the character of the one who calls us by name and leads us into purposes greater than we can imagine. Abraham died at the age of 175, full of years, gathered to his people. He was buried in the cave he had purchased in Canaan, the first piece of the promised land he ever truly owned. He died still looking forward to the fulfillment of promises he had only seen from a distance. But he died in faith, and that faith became the inheritance of every generation that followed. In our own lives, we face the same invitation Abraham received, to leave the familiar and step into the unknown, to believe promises that seem impossible, to obey commands that make no sense, to trust a voice we cannot see with a future we cannot predict. The question is not whether we will face these moments. We will. The question is whether we will respond with faith or with fear, whether we will stay in your journey to Canaan, whether we will laugh in cynicism or laugh in joy when God does the impossible, whether we will withhold our Isaac or offer him in trust that the Lord will provide. Abraham's life teaches us that faith is not the absence of doubt. It is the choice to trust in spite of doubt. Faith is not knowing the destination. It is knowing the one who leads. Faith is not understanding how God will fulfill his promises. It is believing that he will, because he is faithful. And so we stand in the long line of Abraham's children, not by blood, but by faith. We count the stars and remember the promise. We build our altars and acknowledge the one who has called us. We journey toward Moriah, trusting that even in the darkest valley, even at the edge of the knife, God will provide. He always has. He always will. If this story has stirred something in your heart, if you see yourself in Abraham's journey of faith, take a moment to reflect on where God might be calling you to trust him today. Consider leaving a like on this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. What does Abraham's faith mean to you in your own journey? And if these biblical narratives speak to your soul, subscribe to the Scriptures Live, where we continue to explore the timeless stories that have shaped human faith across the centuries. The journey of faith continues. The call still echoes. And like Abraham, we have the choice to believe,